Welcome to the first to the season. Please turn off your audio and your camera so that it will be easy to have Paolo Battaglia talking. And I have the pleasure to introduce you tonight, Paolo Battaglia. But first, I want to thank you for being with us, and hopefully we can continue to satisfy meet your interest with our next programs. We have a surprise on November 1st. We'll have our gala, a virtual gala this year, and it will be on November 1st at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So please save the date and stay tuned to receive information and details on how to register. Today, Dario Penzo is helping me to coordinate this virtual meeting. Dario, ciao, thank you for helping us.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Francesca. And welcome everyone to be here today.
Now I have the pleasure to introduce you to Paolo Battaglia. Paolo Battaglia is the founder of the published company Anniversary Books, founded in 2009. After working for many years as a museum director, he founded his own publishing company. He worked for the Museum Giuseppe Panini in Modena. That was a local history museum that became then a National Photo History Museum. His books are photo essays that include many pictures and documents because his objective is to tell contemporary history through historical images. The pictures become the stories. Afterwards, Paolo worked on his dream of being a documentary filmmaker. So he spent 4 months in the US, traveling for over 25,000 miles to conduct his research. Among his previous books, you can find Trans-Siberian Diaries, that is a story of 6 friends crossing by train over 5,000 miles from Moscow to Beijing. And then, in collaboration with Linda Barrett Osborne, he published Trovare l'America. The English title is Italian Americans, and was published in 2013 with the Library of Congress in Washington, with a foreword by Martin Scorsese. This book is an original perspective of the complex experience of Italian immigrants, told through 500 selected images from the Library of Congress records. And today's books and documentary are the follow-up of this original work. So, ladies and gentlemen, Paolo Battaglia.
Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you, Francesca and Dario. I'd like to thank the Italian Cultural Society of Washington for the opportunity of being in the US for tonight, at least virtually. It's a great pleasure, especially for a nomad like me, because one of the hardest things in the last few months has not been able to travel anymore. And so being there, at least virtually, is really a great pleasure. Now I'm going to show you a small synthesis of the documentary that I produced last year, called Italian American Country. But before, I would like to introduce you the work that I've done on Italian American history. And to do this, we're going to see a few images. And let's start. Okay. My book, Italian American Country, was released last year, around this time of the year. But it's still one of the best kept secrets of Italian American studies. That has to do with the fact that I'm a very small Italian publisher, and it's very hard to reach the American audience. I tried to do it through a book tour last year, a cross-country book tour, but it was not enough. So tonight, it's a very important moment for me because I can reach more people. Italian American Country, as Francesca said, is a second leg of my research on Italian Americans. The first book was published and co-authored with Linda Barrett Osborne. I'm very happy because I saw Linda at the virtual meeting, so it's a pleasure to see you and Bob. The title of our book was Trovare l'America for the Italian version and Explorers, Emigrants, Citizens for the American version. And like all the books that I make, it was a visual history in which we assemble photographs, documents to show what Italians did in more than 500 years in America. Its main focus was the Great Immigration, or if seen from your perspective, the Great Immigration of the last decades of the 19th century and early 20th century. But once the project was finished, I felt that there was two essential things missing. The first was a geographical shortcoming because most holdings of the Library of Congress deal with the larger communities of the Northeast, and there was almost no sign of the many Italians that went elsewhere. The second was that I didn't hear the voices of the Italian Americans, but only saw them in photographs and read about them in documents and books. But I was lucky, and one of the books that I stumbled upon during my research was Attraverso gli Stati Uniti, across the US, and the author was the Italian ambassador at the time. His name was Edmondo Mayer de Planche, a nobleman from Piedmont, who was the first and maybe the only Italian diplomat that tried to understand why Italian immigrants, who were mostly peasants, stopped in the industrial cities and didn't go where their traditional skills could have been more useful. And he decided to set off in a cross-country trip to find and meet the small communities that for one reason or the other had been able to do just that. I used this trip as a blueprint of mine and set out to meet the descendants of the people met by the ambassadors. And here you can see the two trips that I made across the US. The first one was in 2014, and it's the red one. And the second one, after a 4-year break in 2018, is the blue one. And it allowed me to complete all the things that were missing after the first trip. And so in 2019, I finally published the book and released the documentary. The book devotes a chapter to each one of the 20 cities and towns I visited. And then there are a few chapters on more general topics like the importance of railroads for Italian immigrants. I think that most towns that I visited are unheard of by most of you, but it's not surprising because they are very small towns lost in the middle of nowhere. Just to give you an example, I went to Paradise Valley in Nevada, and the first person I met greeted me with "Welcome to the end of the world." And I still don't understand why or how, but in the late 19th century, stonemasons from Piedmont decided to settle there and became ranchers and cowboys. The pages of the book are divided in 2 rows with old photographs and historical information. Just a second. And historical information at the top, and my photographs and the words of the people I met at the bottom. This is to show how the past and the present of these places are still connected, and how much the people I met still feel part of the Italian tradition. And that was one of the questions I wanted to answer when I started my trip. What happened to the descendants of the people met by the ambassador, who had to live so far, both from the mother country and from the large hubs of Italian American culture? Had they been able to keep their traditions and heritage alive, or had they become 100% Americans? I found out that both answers were true and was especially surprised to find many people who could still speak some kind of dialect, the same that their ancestors from Italy had spoken when they came. Some of the surprises had a very personal touch, because the only time I lived in the US was in my senior year in high school as a foreign exchange student in the Ozarks in Missouri. It was a different time, and except for a telephone call every other week with my parents, I didn't speak Italian for a whole year and never met an Italian American. To my surprise, my research brought me to 2 of the only 3 towns that had been founded by Italians, and they were no more than 2 hours away from the town where I had lived. One is Tonti Town in Arkansas, and the other is Rosati, right on the historic Route 66. And this is where I took this picture, which for me has been like time traveling between my US and Italian past. The red mailbox is exactly like the one where I went to pick up the infrequent letters from home when I was there as a foreign exchange student, while the vineyard is exactly like my grandest vineyard back in Modena. These are the covers of the two versions of the book. Like the first book, Trovare l'America, I made an Italian version and an American version, one in English. Okay, now enough on the book. I would like to show you some parts of the 3 episodes of the documentary. I'm going to stop here and there to focus on a few things, the first one of which has to do with the language. The documentary is both in English and in Italian, and chose to keep the original language in which the people I met spoke. Also, the narrator's voice is in Italian as a tribute to our beautiful Italian language, which becomes even better when it reaches you through the voice of an actor. In this case, it's Alessandro Quartas. He's one of the most appreciated Italian voice actors. He doesn't like to be reminded that, but beyond his film and documentary works, he's also the Italian voice of Mickey Mouse. Let's start with the documentary.
Tra il 1860 e il 1920, milioni di italiani attraversano l'Atlantico per sfuggire a un paese che dopo l'unificazione deve affrontare enormi problemi sociali ed economici. Molti emigranti inseguono il miraggio degli Stati Uniti, dove le strade sono lastricate d'oro e ogni sogno può essere realizzato. Alcuni continuano il viaggio e raggiungono ogni angolo dell'immensa nazione che si presenta davanti ai loro occhi. Seguono percorsi poco conosciuti e creano quella che oggi possiamo chiamare Italian American Country.
I focus mainly on small towns, and among those, I couldn't miss the only towns that have been founded by Italians. As I said before, there are Tonti Town and Rosati, and the third one is Valdez, or Valdez, like the people that live there call it. The only instance in which an Italian community left Italy with the goal of creating its own town in the US. It was a Waldensian community, and they went to North Carolina.
I think the economic situation was so bad that they just came in droves. I mean, we had, you can read in the book in Monongah, and I'll show you Monongah, it was a little town. But Fairmont, where you are now, had in the 1900s, had an Italian consulate right here in Fairmont, which would show you how many we had. Today. You'd have to go to Pittsburgh.
Pietro Bandini, missionario originario di Forlì, nel 1898 guida un gruppo di famiglie che sfuggono alle terribili condizioni di vita della piantagione di Sunnyside in Arkansas.
They had never seen summers like this so hot. They had never seen winters like this so cold. And the malaria, everything was just terrible.
La loro meta è nel nord-ovest dello stato, dove fondano Tonti Town, uno dei più riusciti esperimenti di colonia italiana, grazie al costante lavoro di promozione svolto da padre Bandini.
These came out of Father Bandini's collection. So at one point, I guess he was taking photos of everyone in town, maybe for some kind of marketing purposes back in Italy.
That's what we're thinking, you know, when they were trying to encourage other families to come.
I think Tonti Town, it's an amazing history, really, of these Italians settling in the middle of Arkansas.
The first batch was all men, wasn't it?
No, there were 5 women.
Oh, 5 women, they were all pregnant. Oh dear, oh Lord. There were 29 that came in May, and they were mostly men. They were supposed to do all this work there. I guess the women were brought here to cook and clean, wash the clothes, and you know how the men are. Some of their wives and families came with the Paul group, and whole families came. Some people went back, it was so bad. A lot of Americans helped them. In fact, I said we ought to have a great big sweet potato up here in the museum somewhere. They gave them sweet potatoes. And they would take, the kids would take the sweet potato to school. That was their lunch. And the families, you know, they struggled. They really struggled. And half starved to death. And that first year.
Ambassador Deplanche called the Italian settlements that he visited colonies. And it might be the right word because being so isolated and far away from all they knew, the Italians in these towns were very tight, maybe even tighter than those that lived in the large cities, where they had more frequent interactions with people from outside their community.
At one time, there was just Italians around here. You didn't know very many outsiders, you know. But now, they're all outsiders, and you don't know, there's very few Italians.
My grandfather worked for a chemical company as a janitor, just sweeping. And he bought a little piece of property. And he did something that became very common for Sicilians here, is he would buy a piece of property and he built a house. And then he built another house and another and another. And in the middle, he made his own little piazza in his home. And all of his children lived around. And as I was a child growing up, that's where we played. We stayed in the center, and my grandmother took care of the children. So we had our own isolated little world.
Facevano le chiese etniche perché le persone che sono venuti da Italia, Polonia, Irlanda volevano una chiesa dove si sentivano a loro agio. E Santa Lucia è proprio la prima chiesa italiana nella diocesi di Scranton.
In the beginning, in 1899, they got a group of people together that were educated, doctors and lawyers, business people. And this was a center of not only their social life, but their business life. These old timers didn't understand the language, and they used to say yes when they should have said no, and they said no when they should have said yes, and they just got messed up. And so they would bring their documents here that they would get in the mail, and they would have them interpreted. They would tell them in the, we call it Putanzes, what it's all about. This is where to sign. Most all the old timers signed with X's. They couldn't read, they couldn't write.
Food is one of the essential things about being Italian that no one could take that away. The love of good food.
I remember being 10, 12 years old and discovering pizza. My grandmother, never heard of it. She didn't know what pizza was. Well, they told us that was Italian food. She said, no, it's not. A lot of people thought Italian dishes, and they would talk to her about food that was actually Southern Italian, and she would have no idea what they were talking about.
My grandmother would throw everything from boiled eggs to pork chops to chunks of sausage. Deer sausage was a big thing too, because we were all Adam hunters here in Louisiana. So it's always popular to have that on macaroni and gravy as well.
It's a real basic recipe: salt, pepper, minced garlic, and onions and celery, paste and puree, and water, and meat, ground meat.
Do you put squirrels in polenta here?
Oh, yeah, that's good, good. In the wintertime, how we did it was we'd kill squirrels and then we'd skin them, you know, and everything. And it's real cold wintertime, we hung them in the attic so they would freeze, you know, they would freeze solid, and that made them very good, let me tell you.
This is the home of the original pepperoni roll. That doesn't smell wonderful. I mean, see when you break it up and then you'll get an idea. See, it's just a pepperoni. Beautiful. And basically what they did was it was their bread and their leftover bread. They would use their bread dough and then they would have stick pepperoni. They would cut it into sticks, then they would roll it up, and it was just very convenient.
He loved making wine. Here's his white wine. That's all he made was white wine. But man, that stuff was powerful. Oh.
These people here, I guess they like that octane pretty high. And mette dentro tanto sucro, boost alcohol contents.
This is a bunch of tallies. There's a couple Americanos in here.
Mm-hmm.
This used to be the place where all the tallies after the coal mine, every one of the coal miners would come here after coal and play the midnight. Briscoe, Scoop, Cablenda, okay.
Briscoe, Scopa.
Briscoe, Scoop, and Tree Set. I played.
And you played with Italian cards.
Yeah.
Every Friday night for 6 months, people get together and they play Morra. Now in Italia, Morra non esiste bocce. No? Sai giocare tu e lui. Bocce per sempre, lo fa.
Voi giocate?
Voi giocate? Sì, fate a carte. Al 3-7 sta. I taught my grandkids how to play Morra. It's beautiful.
You're not going to get in on it?
No, they got it.
Hey, okay, Rajin's I could beat this guy every time. I love him. Let's go. Yeah. Come on. They want to see. Let's go. I know what he's going to throw. You know what he's going to throw? Cheese. Oh my God, he's changing up. Cinque. So at night, there's 50 guys who play all night. Wow.
La musica è un altro elemento fondamentale. Gli emigranti arrivano con il loro bagaglio di musica popolare e ogni colonia ha la propria banda.
There's a picture here behind me of what was once called the Italian Colonial Band of Denver. And that was under the direction of a guy by the name of Polici. And he played a lot of his own music. And they played for all the Italian feasts. And in those days, there were quite a few of them. But with that band, we played primarily Italian folk songs. You know, Funiculi, Funicula, E Compare. We did Celle Luna Menzomari. That's one of the most famous ones, you know. Everybody gets to sing, hey, mama, pesce fritto bacala, you know. So they get to do that, and they like that. And in fact, I just played last week. We played for an Italian party, and we did all those songs.
People around here didn't like Italians coming in. They were very against it. And the very first church was burned down. And some people say it was burned down by Native Americans, but probably they wouldn't have any reason really to do that. It was probably other people from around the area.
That's what we were talking about lunch. Like I couldn't think. Vigilantes is what I read. You know.
Yeah. Father Bandini went into Springdale and pretty much made a big proclamation that all these Italian men were trained in the Italian army and they know how to fight. So don't do it again.
Even at today, you know, we have customers come in and they holler, give me a piece of that Dago cheese. I used to get furious. And like I said, my brother was always a teacher. And he said, you know, don't get mad. You know, they can, you know, find a way to get around. So when they were asked for Dago cheese, I said, well, I got the Dago cheese right here. I said, it's $20 a pound. I said, but we have this good Italian cheese right here for $10 a pound. Which one would you rather? And he said, I'll take the Italian cheese. So they never asked for the Dago cheese anymore.
I run for an office, a political office in the city of Wheat Ridge, and I was successful in getting that, and I did it for a couple of terms. A person that wanted to run for this job came and talked to me and said, you know, I'd like your support. And this person said to me, I really need the support of the Godfather. So what does that tell you? You're still pigeonholed. Being Italian, you're part of the mafia, and even that today it exists.
They got the white people, they got the black people, the African Americans, and so then there's the Italians. You follow what I said? There was white, black, and then Italian. We were separated. We were put on in another category, you know.
The South has always been famous for prejudice against blacks. But in a few places, the prejudice extended to other people. And in Ponchatoula, Louisiana, the prejudice extended to Italians. And the good Anglo-Saxon and Scots-Irish and some French citizens in Ponchatoula decided that they didn't want the Italians competing with them. So they put up a sign that said, they called them sundown towns. Well, they had a sign in Ponchatoula that said, Dago, don't let the sun go down on you in Ponchatoula.
The way the people are treating the Hispanics now, we were then. All the people on the construction site, the little dark people on the construction, that was us.
Now everybody wants to be Italian. Yeah. It's the end thing now. If you're Italian.
The chapter from every region has a very personal taste also. I grew up in the north of Italy, and I was brought up believing that we were a rich region and that we were a destination for immigrants, not a starting point. So it was surprising to see that all regions of Italy had contributed to the immigration to the US, even rich regions like Piedmont, Lombardy, and my own Emilia-Romagna. This was confirmed by the first interview I made in my project to a business owner in Vermont whose ancestors came from a town some 20 miles from my own town.
Yeah, around here, it's less from Carrara, more from Tuscany area.
Napoletani, Siciliani, Calabresi.
Mama was from Vicenza.
I'm from Palermo. I'm from Italy.
Calabria.
Came over from Taranto.
They're from the Piedmont.
My ancestors from the Palermo area.
Di Genova e del Veneto o del Piemonte.
Noi carraresi abbiamo, come ti posso dire, abbiamo conquistato il mondo lavorando, la scultura, il marmo.
Eight great-grandparents all came here from Italy. Their names were Boccuzzi, Valeri, Marino, and Chirone. They came from the area around Milan, Rome, Bari, and Avellino. So had they stayed in Italy, I wouldn't exist because they never would have met. But they met in New York, and here I am.
When they came from Emilia, the Veneto, and the Marche, they developed a new dialect here. So all three of those dialects melded into a new one here in Lake Village.
It was a goofy Italian restaurant because the guy I bought it was from Forlì. So most of the menu items were Emilia Romagnese. Whoever decorated it like Venice. And then the specials, I cooked Sicilian. So it was kind of a little crazy Italian place, but people loved it.
Of course, the job was the most important aspect of every immigrant's life, but here I want to focus on language again. This chapter opens with a challenge to all of you, because the first man that you will hear is from southern Louisiana, And his accent, a way of talking, is deeply rooted in that region. And at least for me, it was very hard to catch all that he was saying. What I found fascinating during my travels was that the people spoke about their Italian heritage with the distinctive accent of the American region where they lived, adding a sharp contrast to things that actually made them very similar between one another.
If I need somebody, I'll come. He said, I'll send somebody to get you. Okay. Uncle Sam jumped back on his mule. Gonna come home. Man stopped him. He said, oh, wait a minute. He said, what's that? He said, that mule pulled it off. Uncle Sam said, well, she pulled everything I put her to. I ain't never had it to her off. He said, well, you bring her here tomorrow morning with the harness, and we'll find out if she pulled it off. If she pulls it off, that we would give her 15 cents a day and feed, and we give you 10 cents a day to drive.
How you like that? That's true.
And that's how he got a job. A member got him a job.
L'abbiamo fatto con i nostri sudori. E di come avete fatto, come qua, come là. Come? Con queste mani.
Women and the children, everybody in the fields, Paolo, everybody. I mean, if you were 6 weeks old and it was cotton picking time, you rode a cotton sack. This is cotton. These are the little husks that I was telling you about, Paolo. When you went to pull this stuff out of here, you would be torn to pieces, grabbing. If you needed to pick 200 pounds in a day, you had to snatch it so quickly, and I could always outpick anybody. I really could.
The way they ran the mines, you were not paid in U.S. currency. You were paid in what was called coal miner scrip, and they printed their own coins, and you had to spend it at the company store. And like, now see this just right up here, all of them, these were all company homes. Now, you can see some where people bought them and did different things to them, but see how they're the same size, built the same way.
And this is a company home.
Those are all company homes. That's my dad. And that was all company. All that was owned by the company. They owned the whole town.
Well, you really did owe your soul to the company store.
They fished here, and then when the season was done here, then they would go to Alaska and continue their season over there.
A lot of the stonework, in fact, if not all of the stonework here, was the Italian stonemasons that came and built the store, the buildings that stand. There's on ranches, there's bunkhouses and barns made of stone that the Italian stonemasons quarried and hauled and built. They built this country.
World War II started. The Japanese were the enemy, the Germans were the enemy, and the Italians were the enemy. They actually were enemy in their own country. But here, the Italians had children all fighting for the United States, and they decided they were the enemies. Everybody in Pittsburgh, if they weren't citizens, could not live in Pittsburgh because there was a steel mill and whatever. So they sent them to live in Brentwood, Oakley, Oakland. I remember my grandfather was so upset. So I got two sons, one in the Army, one in the Navy. They're both fighting for this country. Do you think I would do anything against this country?
I feel that my story is typical, and I like that. Being discriminated against, having a hard time getting a little bit more education,
learning English, having the generations that are born here become more Americanized. World War II hits, you have to decide whether you're for Italy or for the United States. Most Italian Americans are in the service of the United States. They become Americans, they change their names, and they begin to assimilate like I did at just about the same time that I did.
My grandparents were Italian. My mother was Italian American. I'm American Italian, and the next generation, they're Americans.
Per esempio la cittadinanza l'ho presa molto di recente ed è stata una cosa veramente commovente, perché loro fanno questa cerimonia, fanno a Auckland in un teatro e ci sono tipo 1000 persone, poi ci sono tante persone che diventano cittadini e la prima cosa che ti dicono è quante nazionalità ci sono nella stanza, no? Ci sono 97 nazionalità diverse, poi dopo alla fine di questa cerimonia ti dicono così è fatta l'America. Questo, dice, noi in questa stanza rappresentiamo quello che è l'America, cioè un paese fatto da persone di culture diverse, di lingue diverse, con valori diversi, con idee diverse, che si uniscono intorno a un'idea comune. Sono insomma i valori della Costituzione americana.
Now you will hear a second voice. It's the ambassador's voice, because every chapter in the documentary starts with a quote from his book, which after more than 100 years still describes very well the towns that I visited and the people that I met.
Giunsero poveri, sfiniti, disprezzati, invisi. Lavorarono, si dimostrarono onesti, parchi, perseveranti, ordinati. Comprarono dallo Stato terre mediocri, le migliorarono. Qualcuno andò sulle ferrovie o nelle miniere, dove il lavoro è duro, ma il guadagno è forte. Ora non contano se non amici e sono ritenuti dagli americani la più brava gente del mondo.
They didn't find the streets paved in gold like they heard.
There was nothing given to us. We earned everything we got, but I loved it, really and truly I did.
We're all in the same kind of general thing. Started from zero, and all of us have done fairly well in our life, you know. And we've never forgotten our roots in the fact that we should help each other when we can.
How people sacrificed, how they came to land so far away, not to speak the language. I mean, my God, how courageous that must have been. And here I am, you know, the grandson of Italian immigrants, entrusted to serve the people as a judge.
You know, that the people that sacrificed, gave up their homeland to come to the United States to build a life, a livelihood, that they are the foundation of all of us here in America. They, because of their sacrifices, we're here. We've been successful. We've been given a great life.
Bambina said our heart, some of our heart is still in Italy, in the village. We go back a lot, but our home is here. This is home.
Okay, this is the end of the presentation and information about the book, how to get the book, how to get the documentary. I'm not a great salesman, but this info is important. You can buy the book through our website and we can ship it with express courier. I know that shipping it to Italy is not, is more expensive than if it were available through Amazon. But if you get together and order more than one book, the shipping cost remains always the same. And if you were interested only in the documentary, you can buy it through Vimeo, and Dario will share the links both to the book and to the Vimeo documentary. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation of the documentary, and if you have questions, I'm here to try and answer them.
Yes, I do have a question, and then Dario will read the questions in the chat, but please turn off video and audio so that we can see also the chats to read. So question for Paolo. So, yeah, need this. So I think...
Francesca, I'm sorry. It's a pleasure to see Professor Cappelletti and Mr. Barbaro. They were both in the documentary, and it's a pleasure to have them here.
Yeah. Barbuto, yes.
Thank you.
Buonasera, Mr. Barbuto and Ron. Yes, we saw them in the documentary. So my question about the book that I still have to finish, just recently started. So I see every chapter, as you said, as related to a place. So I see Morte in Miniera in West Virginia. So there are different themes, and you must have went through very emotional experience also. So I just wanted to know, what was the most emotional experience that you had, and the most dangerous situation, if you had any, during your 4 months that you were in the US filming this documentary?
So the most moving is for sure the image that I showed you of the mailbox, of the country mailbox, because it brought me back so many memories. But the most, let's say, dangerous was going to Dawson, New Mexico. It's a ghost town in the middle of the desert. And to get there, you have to go through 15 miles of gravel road with no telephone connection. I got there as a big storm was approaching. And once I got there and I got out of the car, I was by myself. I saw that there were so many signs, beware of rattlesnakes, that I was kind of afraid. And before leaving the highway, I called home and I told them, if you don't hear anything in 4 hours, just call somebody, because I'll be lost in Dawson. But everything went well. And it's a fascinating place because it's a ghost town, but it's actually just a cemetery. Because many people that lived in Dawson died in mine accidents. And you can see that most names are Italian names. And so it's so strange for me. It was so strange for me during all my travels to think that people would leave Italy and end up in a place like Dawson, lost in the middle of nowhere, really, in 1905, 1910, when it would take maybe a month and a half to get there. So it's very strange and very fascinating to be in places like that.
So we have a question from Suzanne, and she says, I thought I read that the Italian government was paying some Italians to leave Italy. Is this true?
Was paying?
For Italian immigrants to leave, to go
No.
to Italy. It's not true.
It's not true. They had no money at any level, so there was no money from the government. There were people that were trying to lure immigrants to the United States. It was pretty much like what happens today for the African immigrants that come to Europe. You'd have somebody that come to your village and they would tell you, go to this place in the United States, and it could be in West Virginia, it could be in California, it could be anywhere. And they would pay in advance for the trip, but then you'd be tied to them until you'd repay back the price for the ticket. And that would mean for many people something like servitude, especially in the South. There were a lot of Italian peasants that were sent to the plantations, both cotton or sugarcane plantations, and they were sent there in in 1890. So they were sent there to replace the freed African Americans that at that time were starting to emigrate from the country to the cities, both in the south and in the north. So they were replacing former slaves. And once they got there, in many instances, they became actually slaves of the owners of the plantations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And another question is more about connected to your personal experience in America. You say that you've done an exchange in America when you were in high school. I guess they want to know how was it, or what is that lead you to, that gave you some inspiration to write this book?
I think that it affected my whole life, both because I was able to be independent when I was 17, at least much more independent than the standard Italian kid of my age at that time. And so it probably made me do different choices once I grew up. And then it made me love even more the United States with all its contradictions, because I was in a very poor place. I was in the Ozarks, and still today the Ozarks are not a very advanced region. But I found people that were very welcoming. I still have friends there after more than 30 years. So it's something that was so important that both my daughters did the same thing when they were in high school, because they had heard it so many times from me that they wanted to do it. I didn't force them, but probably I instilled in them the want to do something like that.
Yes. The same person is also asking, why did you choose America?
For my foreign exchange.
Yes.
At that time, it was the only option. There was no China, there was no Russia, there was nothing but the US. So everybody that was doing foreign exchange experience was doing it in the US. I mean, you could go to a European country, but it was not far enough for me, and so I wanted to be there. And it has started even before, because I came to the United States with my family when I was 9, and in our group there was a woman that had done the same thing when she was young, and so she probably talked me into it.
Okay, thank you. Another question is actually more one of my questions. This guest, Jan, is telling us that there's a community, Italian community in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and it's south from Fairmont. You said that in your documentary there's a report of a mine tragedy in West Virginia. Can you tell us more about this event?
It was the Monongah Mine. It was, I don't remember exactly the year, but there were more than 300 people that died. It's one of the worst mine accidents in the history of the United States. And most people that died were Italians. There were Italian, Poles, and few Americans, but not too many. And today it's still remembered both here in Italy and in the United States. For the 100th anniversary, there was a monument that was unveiled, and it was donated by Region Calabria, which was the region from where many of the people that died in Monongah came from. And there's been a bitter. It's been very hard to define how many people died in the Monongah accident. There are some reports that say that more than 1,000 people died, but the actual number is 361, 62. The reason why it was so hard to decide how many people had died was that in the mines at that time, you were paid by the ton. So you didn't get a fixed amount of money to work in the mine, but you took out 10 tons of coal, they gave you X amount of money. So what the miners did was taking their kids along with them so that one person could be paid for more coal. But what they did was hidden, so it was not clear how many young kids were inside the mine when it blew up. So that's why it became so hard to define how many people had died in the Monongah Mine and in all the accidents that were so frequent at those times.
Thank you. Another question is coming from Carla. She's thanking you for the great presentation, and she's asking what comes next for you. Will you keep exploring this subject, or are you changing?
I'm changing a lot because I'm releasing a docu-series in the next month. It has to do with America and Italy, but it's a much lighter subject. I'm also a former football player, American football, not soccer. And of course, I played American football in my high school, and I played here in Italy. And I've always been close to the Italian football teams. So I brought a few Italian kids that play football to a high school in San Diego last September. And they were there to learn the secrets from the masters. And at the same time, we brought a chef with us, who's also a football coach. And he was teaching Italian cuisine to the American kids. So we put together sport and Italian food, and it's going to be a docu-series, and it's coming out in about a month. Hopefully it will be on Amazon Prime. Not sure yet, but it could be found there in a few weeks. So it's very different.
It's a very different topic. Okay. Yeah. Francesca?
No, I wanted to ask about that. It will be on Amazon Prime, released October 7th, you said. I was going to have you talk about the experience of the football in San Diego. So that's...
It was a nice experience because I had never been to San Diego, and it actually has one of the most vibrant Italian-American communities in California. So it was an opportunity to meet more Italian Americans and to see what it's like being in San Diego as an Italian. So it was kind of a way putting together the two things that I was doing. And it's going to be released in Italy on October 7th.
In Italy on October 7th.
US, it would be probably October 15th, 20th. It depends on Amazon, not on me.
Okay. That will be interesting. We have some more questions. I see Ron. Dario.
Ask you, what do you think is the difference between the Italian the immigrants to America today and those of previous generation? So what is the difference between the two kind of immigrants?
Well, as far as I know, although I've never been an immigrant to the US, I would have liked to be there working, but never been. So as far as I know, the people that come to America now are more educated, are more in skilled jobs, while way back it was poor immigrants that were there as a last resort because they couldn't find a way of living here in their mother country. So it was a much harder approach to immigration. And I believe it was also much harder society on Italian immigrants. There's a group of people in the documentary that says now today it's the in thing being Italian. I don't know if you as Italian Americans feel the same thing, but from what I heard, it's much easier now being Italians than it was even 25, 30 years ago. Our food, our design, our fast cars, they're all things that are so ingrained in work culture that everybody wants to have those things and be at least a part Italian. I don't know if it's right analysis, but that's how I see it from here.
Another question is from Anna Marie, and she's asking, your information about Italians replacing the slave on cotton plantation was fascinating. Do you write about that in your book, and what is the sources you were able to have? That's my addition.
There's a couple of chapters because you heard about the Sunnyside Plantation in the documentaries, and it was a business that was set up by an American banker and an Italian prince who was also the mayor of Rome. He had so many peasants in his lands in Italy, and he thought that they could give him more money by going to the US. And so he set up this company, the Sunnyside Company, to bring families, whole families, in some cases, whole villages to this plantation. And of course, they were promising great things. They were promising to that the people that got there would have their house, their land, which was a dream for people that were used to work in Italian country. So many people believed this, moved there, but both because of the geographical and climatic aspects, and both because the money that they could get out of their plot of land was not enough, many of them had to work without getting any money. They had to work just to pay what the owner of the company store would give them. So their debt was always higher. And that was a kind of, not slavery, it was called peonage. That was a term that was very common at those times. And it was basically something where you couldn't get out of a debt and you had to stay there even if you wanted to go elsewhere. Many people died of malaria. More than 100 people died in the first winter. But some families remained there and some of them thrived. And there are a couple of books on Sunnyside. They're in the bibliography of my book. And then I spoke to the descendants, and some of the descendants still have the contracts that they had signed before going there with the Sunnyside Company, and that tells you a lot about what kind of relationship there was between the owner and the people that went there.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question is from Ron. Is asking, did you visit Tonti Town in the Ozark region of Arkansas? Mostly Sicilian immigrants?
No, no Sicilians. Most of them were Venetian, from Veneto. They were from Veneto, they were from my region, Emilia-Romagna. Actually, there is a lady that says with a very distinct Missouri accent that Tonti Town was an Italian settlement, because in Missouri they say Italian, not Italian. And she was from Zocca, which is a town very close to Modena. There were people from Lombardy and one family from Lazio. Most of them are from Veneto. the man that said that he liked squirrels in his polenta, he was the one who spoke still today a fluent dialect from Veneto. So yeah.
I can say I kind of recognize that since polenta Eusei is a typical plate from us. Birds and polenta.
And grapes. I see in the Tonti Town, Arkansas, this beautiful picture of the ladies at the grape festival. So, it's fascinating. It's images, pictures are the best source to tell these stories. Congratulations for collecting all these original pictures. It's an amazing job.
Right. It's most of these small places have historical societies, small museums. They're very naive at times, but they hold everything that that community gathered in centuries. So it's easy to find those kind of images in small places like that. Probably easier than in large cities and towns. Which, by the way, I also visited 4 large cities, and I decided on New York for obvious reasons, because most of the people came through New York. New Orleans for the same reason, because most people from Sicily came through the port of New York until 1892. All the people that went to the south, most of the people that went to California entered the US through the port of New Orleans. And I chose Denver because you probably know that Italians have a fascination for the Wild West. And so for me, Denver was the symbol of the Wild West. So the people that got there on the wagons, on the covered wagons, like that we've seen in so many Western movies. So that was the reason why I went to Denver. And then San Francisco, because that's the symbol of the Italian presence in the West Coast.
I have another 2 questions that both are regarding the immigration and discrimination. The first question is, was there discrimination in Italy against Italians that immigrated to the US? And if so, does it still exist?
It's not discrimination, but there are so many stereotypes about Italian Americans here in Italy. And I must confess that some of those I had them before studying Italian Americans, because we're so used to see Italian Americans in movies and in plays and anything through what we get from the United States. And so we tend to believe that they're all the same. And this is very true still today. One thing that we don't understand, and it's very hard for us to recognize, is the importance of Italian Americans after the war, after World War II, and even before, with all the money that they sent to their families, to their villages, to their towns, and that in many cases have to build or rebuild those towns. But even with these very important things that Italian Americans did, we still feel a superiority complex toward them, which is not nice. And it's probably one of the things that I'm most happy about, because especially the first book was very well received in Italian medias, and it was a chance for Italian newspapers to talk about Italian Americans through a different lens. So it was very important for what I did with that book together with Linda.
Thank you. Another question is from Chiara, and she says, I think there's every first and second generation Italian American as stories of discrimination that were passed down from their parents or they may have experienced discrimination themselves. What was your reaction to hearing about this discrimination from the people you met here?
Well, of course, I was sorry for what they had to go through, but it also made me think about what we are doing here today, because we've been an immigrant country for so many years. Now we're a country where people come, and we're reproducing exactly the same behaviors that we've received as immigrants. So that made me think that whenever you're in a stronger position, but you don't feel that strong against somebody else, then you tend to reproduce that kind of behavior. And yeah, most of that.
Okay, I think there's no more question from our guests. Francesca?
So I just wanted to let you know that we'll stay on the theme immigration, Italian immigration to the US on November 15th. Actually, we will present the book from Giorgio Chiarva about the story of Amedeo Giannini, who was the Genoese coming to San Francisco in 1904 and founding the Bank of Italy, now Bank of America. So November 15th will be with the author in a conversation with the film director Giuliano Montaldo, a friend of him, and we'll have another brilliant conversation about the amazing history of Bank of America. And then, well, before that, on October, we'll have another meeting on October 25th. And as I said before, November 1st is our virtual gala that this year will celebrate the Italian innovation, creativity, and the human spirit. So stay with us. We hope that everybody receives our emails, and you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and all social media, Instagram. And thank you, Dario, for helping us with this event. Thank you, Paolo, for giving us this interesting presentation. So information about the book are on our website, events, social meeting. You'll find the details about where to purchase the book and the documentary. And if you don't have anything to add, we can say goodbye. Arrivederci a tutti e grazie.
Arrivederci. Grazie a tutti.
Grazie a tutti.
Grazie a tutti.